Hello, this is Paul with another SQL Skills Insider demo video. In this demo, what I thought I'd do is show you a curious phenomenon that I was dealing with about a week or so ago. And what it comes down to is if you add another log file, and the time that you would find it acceptable to do this is when you run out of space in your primary log file and you don't want to drop into the simple recovery model and break your log backup chain, and you don't have enough space to be able to take a log backup for whatever reason. Then you can add a secondary log file and then make use of the log file to allow the workload to continue going. Eventually you're able to clear your log and then you drop the secondary log file. The problem that I came across, somebody sent me an email and said they had an issue where they couldn't drop the secondary log file. So I did a little bit of investigation and figured out what was going on, and I thought I'd show you. So what I'm going to do is create a database to play around with. And what I've done is I've set the size of the initial log file to 5 megabytes. And then I'm going to add another log file. So we're pretending we've got the case where we've run out of space in our transaction log and we want to be able to continue. So I add my secondary log file. So I've created another log file with 5 meg. Now if we look with DBCC log info, remember that's the only way you can have a look and see what's going on inside the transaction log. DBCC log info, undocumented, unsupported, but very safe to use. It's going to show us how many virtual log files that we have in each of our log files. Now a virtual log file, if you go and read all the information I've put out there on how the log works, it's in books online and the various insider books and stuff like that as well, you'll see that a virtual log file is a kind of sub-portion of the log. And this is the crux of the matter why we can't drop our second log file. Now, look at this. Our first log file, the primary log file, which is always file ID 2, has 4 VLFs. The second log file that we've just added, again, has 4 VLFs. That's because there's a formula that says how many VLFs you get depending on the initial size of your log and how big each growth or auto growth of the log is. And we created a 5 meg log, so we get 4 VLFs. We find that, oops, going back there, we find that only one of them is active, okay, the rest of them are inactive. Now imagine that we've filled up our log, we've added another log file, and we go to try and drop our log. And what we might have done in the meantime is done something like a shrink database, maybe because the log grew out of control. So let's say, for instance, we tried doing a shrink database in this case. Now, in this case, none of our files are big enough, so a shrink database doesn't actually do anything. So maybe we say, well, let's go ahead and do a shrink file. Now you can do an explicit shrink file on each of the log files. So what I'm going to say is I want to do a shrink file of my primary log file. I want to get down as close as I can to 1 megabyte. So I go ahead and do that. And I'll do it on the second one as well. Try and get the log as small as possible. So now I think I've got the log as small as possible. What I'm going to do is try to remove my second log file. I don't need it anymore. Okay, we're in this pretend situation. Don't need it anymore, so I'm going to go ahead and do an alter database remove file. And it says you can't because it's not empty. But how can that be when we don't have anything active in there? Well, if we go and look at DBCC log info, we can see that what's happened is the explicit shrink files that we did shrunk each of the log files down, so they've only got a single VLF each. Now the transaction log as a whole has to have at least 2 VLFs at all times. One of them always has to be active. So what happened when we did our explicit DBCC shrink files is that each of them was shrunk down to 1 VLF, but that still preserved the rule of the entire log must have 2 VLFs. Now the problem, of course, the reason we got our error message is because if we were to drop this file, the log would only have a single VLF, and that's impossible. Okay, that breaks the rule. So how can we drop our second file if we've gone ahead and done these shrink files? The answer, of course, is you have to explicitly grow the first log file so that it has multiple VLFs. So let's say we take our first log file and we expand it out to 5 megabytes, and these are obviously very, very small just for the demo. If we look at DBCC log info, what we're going to see is that now we've got 5 VLFs for our primary log file. Our secondary log file only has 1 VLF, but now we should be able to drop it and preserve the rule that the log itself has 2 VLFs at all times. So I was able to do that by shrinking these. I was able to reproduce this problem by shrinking these files down, because I created log files that were big enough that each of the VLFs was more than a megabyte. So I was able to actually shrink each of those files down to one VLF each. And that's the situation that the person who emailed me got into. It took me a while to figure out what was going on and how to actually repro it. But that's a very interesting problem that you may run into if your log file actually does run out of control and you have to add another one. You always want to make sure you're able to drop that secondary one as soon as you possibly can. That's it, pretty short demo this time. Thanks for watching, and thanks for being a SQL Skills Insider.